See you at the equator.
See you at the equator.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Severance Season 2 Postmortem. Patrick Klepek, we've already covered the finale here on Decoding TV, but now we're a week after the finale, and we have had a chance to read people's reactions that people send into decodingtv@gmail.com. We've read interviews that people have done. I've watched behind-the-scenes stuff. And so the purpose of this segment is just to kind of put Season 2 to bed in our minds and just kind of like share any leftover thoughts about Season 2. So we're going to be reading a bunch of stuff that you have written in to us at decodingtv@gmail.com and on YouTube channel. But Patrick Klepek, I guess the other thing I would say is like the quantity of media about Severance has been massive. Like there's just been tons of interviews and postmortems and so on. And so like we're probably not going to cover everything. We'll do our best. I do want to just ask you, like, is there anything in the last week that you wish we had discussed, or you're like, oh man, like I should definitely bring this up about Severance Season 2? Or like, I guess basically just any additional thoughts you've had now that the season is over.
I think it's been interesting. I think this is going to rage between Season 2 and 3, despite there being a very clear answer. But there's so much discussion over in the final corridor scene.
Right, yep.
Is that Helena or is that Heliar? Everybody involved with the show has said in the script, how we played it.
Yeah.
That is Heliar. That is not another trick. But I think that question it doesn't matter. Like that is going to fuel so many Severance theory videos for the next 18 months before, hopefully we get Season 3 earlier than Season 2. And I just... every subsequent interview, it seems like a little more of an exasperated tone of like, no, it's just, like, what do you mean? It's just like, did you watch the show? It's it's Heliar. And then people on Twitter be like, I think that might be Helena. So I feel like that's going to continue.
You're referring to the final scene where Mark S's Innie has led Gemma to the outside door and then closes the door and then turns, like Heliar is there, and then he needs to decide like who to choose between the two of them. And some people have speculated that it's Helena, and there's a reason why some people have speculated that. Like when Mark S chooses Heliar, she kind of gives Gemma this look, right? She kind of gives this look, and people are like, "Ooh, that's the evil Helena look that she gives to her when he chooses to go with Heliar." Now, as you've said, multiple interviews have attested otherwise. According to an LA Times interview, Britt Lowers asked, like, Britt, the way Helly looks back at Gemma was powerful. Britt says, Heliar seeing Gemma, Britt seeing Deechen's performance on the other side of the door was really affecting. That last moment where she's seeing this heartbreaking thing happening across the hallway, my eyes were just drawn to Deechen. That was something that Deechen, by the way, plays Gemma. That was just something that happened on the day. I remember just being like, I can't take my eyes off her, even if I'm being pulled away. There's a connection there. There's this moment where I think Heliar is seeing an outie, having empathy for an outie, maybe for the first time, and seeing this other woman who loves the outie version of the same person that she loves on the inside. That has an effect, even as they're running away like wild horses. That lingering image, that heartbreaking image that stays with her as they're both like, what are we doing? What's next? And yet, she's free. There is also related to that, by the way, Patrick.
I was just going to ask. I'm seeing this in our show notes because, like, something I've sat with, like, is like, oh, Gemma doesn't know that Mark is severed.
Yes. Well, the thing is, Deechen Lockman, who plays Gemma, gave an interview to Shadow and Act where she explains that again. This is the way she's playing it. I believe in death of the author, and you can have your own interpretation.
Sure.
But she has said that. According to her, she believes that Gemma understands that it's Mark's Innie, and that Mark's Innie doesn't understand, like doesn't know who she is, basically.
Okay.
Okay. So,
I mean, it makes sense to me that at some point she might have been told that Mark was was he? I guess at Lumen, like had been. I can believe that, but in the show, like what we know in the show, it's reasonable to come to the conclusion that she is looking at her husband, who just rescued her, run off with this mysterious woman down the hallway.
Right. There you go. Some answers to some questions people had about last week. Whether people will actually accept those answers,
They won't.
Who knows?
What
They
else
won't.
are you going to talk about
What are you gonna talk about?
for 2 years? Apparently, they put padding on the door because she was there just like smashing
Wailing
on this
on it
metal
for, like,
door
yeah.
for half an hour or whatever, and so they eventually put like some pillows on there to try and help her hands.
There were some questions about like how Cold Harbor works. I tried to articulate as best I could my understanding of it in last week's episode of the podcast, but I think the idea basically being that Lumen is trying to eliminate all pain. They've said that is their goal, and so the idea is that you could theoretically sever people from unpleasant events or experiences, and that this would be like a really compelling product you could release. In a Washington Post interview with Dan Erickson on how Cold Harbor works, the question was asked, we learned that as Harmony Cobel tells Mark, the numbers are your wife. What informed that reveal? Dan Erickson then responds, I love the idea that this whole time Mark has been sitting there looking at this mysterious sea of data, that he was actually staring into the mind of the woman that he's mourning on the outside. That was the emotional seed that was important to me. He's finding her tempers. He's able to recognize them because on a deep level, that transcends Severance. He knows her, he understands her, and he can see the pieces of her soul and identify them. He's able to use them to build these new versions of her, and the reason that it works is because he loves her so much, end quote. So that's Darren Erickson, one of the creators of the show, explaining how that all works. I think there are still like some unanswered questions, Patrick Klepek, about this whole thing. For example, in the first season of the show, we see that the other innies, like Helly R, also feels things when she's looking at Gemma's mind, and the other innies like Irving and Dylan apparently experience the same thing. Like, how does that work? That's not explained. There in episode 7 of the show of season 2, we see that there are these characters known as Watchers. Like, there's people who look like the innies, Mark and Dylan and Irving, that are observing everything they're doing. Like, what is the point of that? Is there a purpose to that? Is it just a weird thing? Why do those people physically resemble their innies? Like, I don't think that has been fully explained yet. I don't know if it will be explained, but anyway, just wanted to point out those things. There's still a bunch of unanswered questions about Cold Harbor, and like how it would be productized, how it would be implemented. But fundamentally, I think the core idea is it's him putting together her mind, and it's Lumen trying to stop pain in the world. All right. We asked for people's questions and comments. We got a bunch of them. I want to throw a shout out to all the folks at decodingtv.com who commented. I'll read a couple of the comments. I do want to say, if you are enjoying this podcast, you want to support the podcast and help to keep it going, become a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com. We got ad-free episodes for you, early access episodes, occasional bonus episodes. Patrick Klepek and I recently covered Invincible Season 3. That's available only to subscribers. But everyone you hear on the podcast, everyone who's a co-host on the podcast gets paid, and it's because of the paid subscribers at decodingtv.com that we can do that. One of the questions that came up, Patrick Klepek, was around like why people were so pissed that Mark S or Audi Mark got into Cold Harbor, the room.
Oh, fuck.
Why was the ritual like Jamie Egan was like screaming the F word? Why was the ritual disrupted? Why did they fail? And people pointed out some obvious things that were nonetheless very important, and I'm going to read about them. Decodingtv.com, JP Halsky writes, my guess is regarding the ritual is that it isn't complete because they need to see if Gemma remembers anything that happened, right? Remember, like, one part of it is like,
right,
Gemma does the traumatic thing, then they interview her to see, like, do you remember the traumatic thing? And they're unable to do that because and as JP Halsky writes, the show gives us scenes previously which Gemma was probed of whether she had memories or associations with different rooms. Mark tainted that experiment, and they'd have to start over from scratch. Isaac B writes into decodingtv.com, was I the only one having flashbacks to Brienne versus the Hound during the Drummond fight scene? Also, I think it's debatable that Cold Harbor was a success. Lumen was able to successfully test the most painful experience of someone's life. Doesn't transcend Severance. But maybe there is an emotion even more powerful than pain that Lumen isn't considering, like love. Did she leave the room with Mark because she somehow recognized him deep down, or did she just leave with him because he promised her freedom and a way out? End quote. I do think that is an ambiguity. Like, that's another way you could interpret why all the Lumen people are pissed, is that, oh, she recognizes Mark and therefore Cold Harbor has failed, right? I didn't have that interpretation. I thought she kind of, it's like, here's a person who's telling her a weird story. She's basically an infant in her mind. Like, she has no idea what's happening. And so this idea of this guy coming and saying, hey, come with me, I'm going to free you. Like, I don't think she needs to recognize that's Mark to follow him. Did you have any sense of like whether she recognized Mark in the scene where he comes into the Cold Harbor room?
No, I interpret it the same way you did. I also think that there's room for the show to explore that though in the future if it wants to. Like obviously the show is deeply about identity and like what is the self and what does anything transcend Severance. Like that is an open question that the show doesn't necessarily close the book on, even if Cold Harbor was, quote, a success. And so, I think she went with him because like I baby and I'm not going to process this bloody guy who's like just sort of, she just does something instinctual, and maybe that's related to her core identity, love transcending Severance. Maybe not. I don't know that you can read too much into that, and I think the show would have to spend time with that for me to look back on that scene as being important in that degree. The other funny anecdote I saw shared in the wake of the finale airing was during that fight with Drummond and Mark. At one point, he gets slammed up against the wall, and apparently they rehearsed that sequence many, like as one would do for a fight scene. Like, here's how it's going to be shot. Here's how we're going to block it. Here's how, and specifically, how do you protect yourself so you aren't injured during it? And during that particular take, Adam Scott did not, if you freeze frame it, did not, like, he was supposed to use his arm and his hand in front of his face so that when he's slammed against the wall, it acts as sort of a cushion. His like elbow blocked it or something like that, and he wasn't able to get it around, and so his whole face is just slammed into the into the wall. And afterwards, they yell cut. Everyone's like freaking out to make sure that he's okay. And then in the sequence, or the behind the scenes thing, Adam Scott asked Ben Stiller's like, "That is the shot that's in the show, right?" He's like, "Oh yeah, of course. Like, yeah, yeah. Once we knew you were okay, that's the one. That's the one that we put in."
Well, yeah, I mean, not even whether he's okay at the end. Like, it's the best take, so they use that one. But yes, he said he was basically mildly concussed in that sequence where his head gets slammed against the wall. So, but yeah, that episode is why you hire Gwendolyn Christie for that role, is because she is one of the people that can believably kick the ass of this massive dude. And be in that role, and obviously did a great job of it. So
in some ways we should have seen it coming. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no one on in the show. Like, Drummond is such a fit. Like, they cast him because he has a physical. There's an intimidating element to his physicality and how you look at him. And I think the show, we talked like, when the show paused production was. Like, this whole goat thing, was that supposed to be a bigger storyline? It just didn't make it, whatever. But like, at the end of the day, looking back at the season holistically, it's like, okay, well, they kind of set up a hero character to like go up against Drummond. They just didn't refer back to this character for many, many episodes. And then we just conveniently forgot she was there as a potential secret weapon.
Dr. Judd 8488 writes on our YouTube channel a theory of what the third season is going to be. I'm just going to say this is a very long and kind of meandering comment, so I'm going to read excerpts from it, but there's some real brilliance in it. Okay, so here we go. I think we'll get one last season almost entirely in the Lumen building. My prediction is that Mark S, Helly R, Dylan G, Mammalians, Nurturable, O&D, and CNM are going to hold Milchek, Maurer, and the nurse hostage to negotiate a new contract with Lumen that includes outside oversight and a greater degree of freedom. They have some food in the vending machines. They have goats they might be able to milk. It might be enough for a few days. I'm expecting Mark S will insist on negotiating this through Devin. Perhaps Dylan will have some leverage with Gretchen too, but I think Gemma will go into hiding. But James will essentially call their bluff. He doesn't care enough about Helena to want her to get her back. And perhaps Helly is pregnant and he figured out from the Helena egg breakfast scene or something, and he has his sights set on her baby. I think Irv will come back at the very end to help with Devin and Cobel and resolve the strike and hostage situation. Bert might go down too, and their innies might be reunited. I don't know. James will be overthrown as CEO when all his dirty laundry is exposed by Cobel. Not just the statutory sexual assault, but also the people they've abducted in the past, and perhaps the severed status of people like Rebecca outside Lumen. And he, Maurer, the nurse, and Natalie will be arrested. Cobel will regain her position as steward of the innies and finally get the dubious honors owed to her, perhaps with Rogabi's involvement, maybe? Milchek will finally quit and go off and try to have a life outside of work. He may be a crucial witness to bring the Egans down in a court case. I think we'll probably get a time skip in the final episode showing Mark Scout kissing Gemma goodbye in the morning and going off to a reformed Lumen under Cobel's authority, where he kisses Helly and a baby, and they get to work on something other than MDR with Dylan G and maybe Irving B at their side. It's not the most earth-shattering scenario, but the show, for all its sci-fi mystery box goodness, is fundamentally about a workplace, about the inescapability of work, about integrating our work lives into the totality of our selfhood, about finding joy in the mundane, about workers' rights, and the evils and dangers of faceless corporations. I think we have to return to our starting point, only with more power and awareness for the workers, which is a very grounded overall message for a fantastical show. TLDR, Severance says, join a union, end quote.
Man, did I write that letter?
Lot going on. It sounds like you're aligned. That's what you want, Patrick, right?
Yeah, I think that is a very sensible arc for the show to go on, where you spend like, they're trapped on the severed floor, but actually what you need to do is reform it. Now, granted, like that, reform the system is perhaps a very neoliberal take on like what you should do to the system, and I can understand some political critiques of like, no, the workplace. But yes, the workplace should get better for the workers. But is it still Lumen? I don't know. But yeah, I can see that as being a very. I think I mentioned this in our discussion over the conversation that Mark has between Innie and Audi, is that my belief is for the Mark character by the end, it's treated like a divorce, and you chop up the time spent, and like they're like both Helena and Helly will, well, maybe I don't know what happens to Helena in that scenario. Like I think they find some way for Helena to go to the Phantom Zone and to never come back, and Helliar is the one that gets to live, but that Mark ends up sharing his life with his Innie.
We will see. I saw a comment online that was very funny about how like somebody on Twitter/X had posted the ending of, I think it was episode 4 or 5, the one where Mark S gets reintegrated. Do you remember which one that was?
Mm-hmm. I think it's 4, yeah.
And somebody said like, the ending of this episode changed the whole world, because it's a very effective ending with him like flashing in and out of his Innie's existence. And then somebody quote tweeted that and said, it didn't even change the season that it was a part of.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I was like, for a show that we constantly like, wow, they're just willing to rip through plot points. And we said that like in that, it was like, I can't believe they're doing reintegration so early. And then over the course of the season, it's like, wow, like did we?
I'm sad that like the reintegrate, like what are the implications of reintegration got dropped? We basically didn't explore it at all. Really kind of a bummer. Now, I saw Mark from St. Louis writing to decodingtv@gmail.com something really interesting. Like, I'm not saying I would have been happy with this, but like, this was a really interesting theory. Basically, I'll just read the email. In season 2, episode 7, when Devin suggests taking Mark to the birthing cabins to Rogabi is already familiar with her treat and it immediately dismisses the idea as two completely different things. This makes it seem that Severance chips are more complicated than just having an on and off switch at a severed location. Cobel adds additional evidence to this idea when she explains to Mark S. about what he needs to do to save Gemma at the beginning of the season 2 finale. Cobel tells Mark S. his chip is only attuned to his floor, and once he gets down to the testing floor, he'll become his outie again. So why have the big reveal of Cobel inventing the Severance chip? This might make her one of the few people in the world that could attune a Severance signal on the fly, and that's why she could make the cabin scene happen. It's never actually expressed on screen, but it would make sense if they didn't want to make it seem super easy to turn someone's chip on or off at any severed location. I might be grasping at straws, but if this theory is incorrect, how did they make it work for Mark S. in the cabin? End quote. That to me is the most compelling reason why they had the, like, if they had done that, it would have been a really compelling reason to have the episode 8, like Cobel is the inventor of Severance. Because to recap what Mark's email is saying, right? Like, Cobel says, hey, when you go down to the Gemma floor, the exports hall, Mark, you'll become your outie again because, like, your chip is not attuned to that floor. So then the question is, when Mark goes to the birthing cabin, why does he become his innie? It makes no sense. Like, no one would have tuned his chip to be become his innie at the cabin. So that doesn't make sense. One way you could have bridged the gap is saying Cobel knows how to tune chips. And that's why, like, they went there. But they never actually explained that on screen. I think it actually would have been a cool way to make episodes 8 details come back in some way. That helps the show. But Patrick, any thoughts on that?
No, that all makes sense to me. I still think, Cobel is mysterious and important, is like a little bit how the show continues to operate. And I suspect she's going to have a big arc in season 3 that this lays some of the breadcrumbs for, and we'll just have to wait and see how all that plays out. Because it's, the fact that she understands the severed chip, she understands so much what's happening at Lumen, that sure feels like an advantage for a hostage negotiator. Like, if that's what's going to be part of what drives many elements of season 3.
Brandon writes into decodingtv@gmail.com. Now, I just want to say, before I read this email, this is going to be pretty critical of season 2 of the show. And, I personally love this email and I love this perspective, and multiple people have written in with it. So, but I think it's easy to see the online fandom online and think of it as monolithic and everyone loves the show. But there were a lot of people that were unhappy with season 2, and I want to share some of their perspectives as well. Brandon writes in, I'm writing after listening to your episode about the Severance finale. While the show continues to deliver stunning visuals, I feel like the second season prioritized style over substance. Season 2 expanded the weirdness factor with marching bands, goat sacrifices, and an orpo, but characters like Dylan and Irving were relegated to side stories that didn't satisfyingly connect to the main plot. Several storylines seemed abandoned, reintegration was built up and then sidelined, Cold Harbor was never satisfyingly explained nor deepened, and Helena's public confession from season 1 disappeared with barely a mention at the last minute. The fractured jumping timeline early on made things needlessly confusing, and many plot developments seemed to exist just to set up the finale's choice between Helly and Gemma. I understand working backward from the ending they wanted, but the story felt predestined instead of inevitable because of it. What made season 1 special was how it balanced surreal elements with grounded, relatable characters in a tight, focused story about workers fighting against a powerful system. As you said, David, season 2 made the world seem smaller instead of larger, with Lumen seemingly strangely incompetent. Where was their security? And characters becoming chosen ones rather than ordinary people. The pacing felt uneven, with episodes like Cobel's backstory and Orpo pulling us away from the main storyline right when it was building momentum. I also simply don't buy how the show got our characters back to Lumen and MDR. They needed to be there, so they were, for reasons. While the acting remained excellent and individual scenes were brilliant, for the overall narrative, it lacked cohesion for me. I'm curious if you noticed how divided the fan base has become, with some viewers completely buying into the mythology, while others are frustrated by what feels like a show spinning its wheels and creating mystery for mystery's sake. Perhaps most concerning is how season 2 seems to have shifted away from the powerful anti-capitalist message that made season 1 so resonant. The first season brilliantly critiqued how corporations dehumanize workers by demanding that we leave our personal lives at the door. But now, by focusing on innies fighting for their existence within Lumen rather than escaping it entirely, the show risks undermining its premise. Instead of condemning the severed workplace as inherently exploitative, season 2 almost validates it by suggesting that that these workplace personas deserve lives within the system rather than freedom from it. This subtle shift feels like capitalism's tendency to neutralize anti-work art by making us root for better conditions within broken systems rather than imagining life beyond them, end quote. I have a lot of sympathy for this viewpoint because I think Brandon is right that season 1 definitely felt more anti-capitalist than season 2. And season 2 is about like, hey, the innies are people too. You know, we should give the innies lives somehow within the system. And now, I guess where I might disagree with Brandon is like, we should give the innies lives too, but within the system, I don't know that the show is clearly saying that. You know, like I don't know what it's trying to say about like what happens to the innies, right? Just that they should have their own lives in some way, not necessarily that they should continue to be workers. Patrick Klepek, any thoughts on Brandon's email?
I agree with all your points and don't care. Like I'm like you, very sympathetic to the arguments laid out, and yet shows change where they're going, and I like where this show is going. I think part of it is because I'm a sap at heart, and like the emotional core they have found with this show, I find deeply appealing and interesting, and I want to see that. I'm fine with that being the thread that the show continues to pull on. But if the elements that you fell in love with in season 1 or thought were the most interesting for it to pull on now seem like more backdrop or theming around the show as it heads to something slightly more traditional, like a love story.
Right.
I understand that. I think that's a reasonable.
Yeah.
Like, I think the show has diverted paths. I also think part of that is because it's what happens when you make multiple seasons of a show. Like, if Severance was a mini series, I think it could have done what you're talking about. If Severance is a 3, 4, 5 season show, you have to give emotional, justifiable arcs to characters, which often involve having sex and falling in love. And that then feeds into fandom. And that, like, there's just all sorts of very natural things that happen. Like, part of it is like Severance season 1, like a really interesting high concept show with characters. And now season 2 is like really interesting characters within a high concept show. And that's just sort of what happens over several seasons. I think it could have more firmly stuck to the ideas you're talking about if it had the conviction to say, we're a one season show, or we're a 2 season show. We're getting in, we're getting out. The longer it goes on, the longer you need deeper character arcs. And I don't think it's a surprise that like many of the major arcs that our characters went on in season 2 involved romance and love. And I expect that to be continued in season 3, much to the disappointment of this commentator. But I expect that's where it's going.
Yeah, I mean, Alan C. also wrote into decodingtv@gmail.com with similar thoughts. I won't read the entire email here, but Alan wrote in... I mean, Alan had questions about like how any of this shit works. There's a lack of attention to rules of the world they established all through season 1, especially around how Severance works. Like, it makes sense for office work, but then they have a whole severed marching band on the floor. Are there outies musicians, or did they learn as severed people? In season 1, severed people didn't have any sense of pop culture or history. As a musician, wouldn't knowledge of music history and songs be important to playing music? All these things bubble up for me because I'm not sure what the show's about anymore. Season 1 was very clearly about our relationship to work and the ways we create personas for work versus life. We got to see more of what outie life looked like. We saw relationships like the one between Devin and Mark. We saw a world that felt like ours. What is season 2 about? We get few glimpses of the outside world. The MDR team barely does work. The show is no longer about our work or our relationship to it. The show is now about Severance. That's the danger of the Mystery Box show, when it becomes too focused on the Mystery Box and not the world that the Mystery Box exists within. Because without that connection to a tangible world the audience understands, it's a mystery inside a hermetically sealed box. But my God, what a beautiful hermetically sealed box, end quote. Same points, I think, or similar points, you know, and I think your point is well taken, Patrick, that you can only support the anti-capitalist message for so long in a show where, like, theoretically you want the innies and outies to continue to survive and coexist over an extended period of time.
I think the Severance backlash is coming. It will culminate in season 3, and I can't wait for it.
Indeed.
The sign of a popular good work. Actually, Severance was bad all along. Like we're not there yet.
I can't wait.
Like it's coming.
Yeah,
like that
I
is
think you're
absolutely
right.
going to be part of season 3 talking point.
I think you're right, and also I think it's already started. But we'll see. We'll see. Okay, Patrick. Before we wrap up, I have like a couple of very minor odds and ends to just mention, like just a couple like random things to mention that I didn't have a chance to mention during the podcast. In interviews with the creators of the show, they talked about alternate versions of the final scene of season 2, episode 10.
I saw this.
So one of the things was that Ben Stiller had described was like, oh, maybe it's going to be Mark in the hallway needing to decide between Gemma and Helly, and then literally the show cuts to black before he decides. Which I think would have been pretty infuriating. Like, I would have been pretty upset about that. I don't know about you, Patrick.
Well, that would have been very traditional. Like if you were
right. If you were like a network show,
if you sat in front of me and like laid out the arc of Severance, I'm like, yeah, like we want the people screaming at people were screaming still at the television, but I'm glad they made the choice that they did.
Yes.
I wouldn't have been shocked if they had gone in that direction because it makes a lot of it probably makes more sense from a ROI perspective to cut it off there, but artistically those final shots, that final sequence are like beautiful and haunting and interesting and artistically weird and aesthetically weird, and I'm glad, and it also I think frankly gives you more to chew on about the future of the show than the cliffhanger would have. Like I think it's a more interesting finale,
yes,
with a choice being made than not.
I would agree, and I think they were well within the rights to have ended the episode there. Like, if it did, it would have gotten people talking for like a really like who does he choose?
Furious.
There was also another version of the ending where Helly is not there, right? Because there's some debate about like would Helly actually be there, and there's the idea that like maybe Mark turns around and runs away without Helly there. I do think it's much more iconic the way they chose it, but I can also see it that way. Like he wanted Mark and Helly to have a moment in the hallway. Like that's ultimately why they decided to do it that way. But anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting take as well. 3 last things, Patrick, before we wrap up the conversation here. One is very quick. Esquire had this article called Severance Season 2, 6 Best Fan Theories Before the Finale. Now, this is written before the finale actually happened. So some of these are definitely not true or have already been proven. But there were a couple of theories on this list that I wanted to highlight. One of them is, what if Gemma is severed by choice? And we had talked about this as a possibility of like, maybe she wanted to get over the pain of losing a child, and so she decided to undergo severance. We never really got the backstory there about like what happened with her car accident. Like, was she kidnapped? Did she have any interest in what Lumen was doing at all? I don't think we ever got those answers. Here's a theory: is Rickon a goat's Audi? So a Redditor pieced together this theory explaining why Rickon might be a goat's Audi. He's described to be very outdoorsy. He somehow scaled a mountain. Rickon's phone alarm during the book reading is a cowbell, the same thing that is used in the Mammalian's Nurture Ballroom to get everyone's attention. Goat merch is all over Rickon's house. There's a goat head bust and an abstract goat painting. And the U-U-R fits too well as a pun. U-E-W-E-U-R. And I really just want this theory to be true. Okay.
Me, same. Big same. Rooting for it.
Anyway, okay. So those are just some fun theories. I wanted to point out that in episode 7, I never made this observation, but in episode 7 of the show, Adam Scott looks way hotter than he does in the rest of the show. The episode with like the flashbacks and you see him and it really lands how important a haircut is to the overall aesthetic. Because when I watch Severance, I'm like, yeah, Adam Scott doesn't look very attractive in the show, but then you watch him in the flashback and he's like, oh man, of course, this is the Adam Scott I know from movies like Torque and Parks and Recreation. And it's because he has a much better haircut. Like, clearly in most of Severance, he is super depressed and has grown out his hair and doesn't give a shit about his appearance for most of it. But I just wanted to call out the importance of the haircut in making the man. Obviously, it's something I personally invest a lot in myself. So, yeah, just wanted to mention that. And then finally, one of my favorite lines from the episode was "See you at the equator," and a lot of people pointed out that at the end of the episode, that's where they showed up, was the dividing line between his outie self and his innie self. And I didn't point that out in the episode, but I wanted to. So
Interesting.
that's it. Anyway, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone at Decoding TV who wrote into us at decodingtv@gmail.com, and to you, Patrick Klepek, for having a series of conversations with me about Severance. I think it's been a lot of fun, really insightful and interesting to hear from people about their thoughts. And we look forward to providing you more TV coverage, not just about Severance, but a lot of other stuff happening throughout the year. So thanks, Patrick Klepek. Hope you had a good time with this one. Did you have a good time with this one, Patrick?
Yeah. Season 3. Sooner than 3 years, please. Small request.
Bring it on. Oh, that's another thing we didn't mention, by the way. Literally minutes after we published our podcast, it was renewed for season 3. So we said it might happen. It's going to happen. We're looking forward to it. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.